Hey everybody, this is Off Leash with Erik Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. Conflicts rage around the world, the latest one in Western Africa. The headline from the Associated Press, a questionable source, of course. Russia's Wagner has deadliest loss in Africa's Sahel, highlighting the region's instability, where they say dozens of Wagner mercenaries were killed by jihadis and rebels over the weekend in northern Mali in what one analyst described on Monday as the largest battleground blow to the shadowy Russian group in years. At least two others were taken captive. Erik, you are very well acquainted with the Western African region and Mali. Give us some background on the history in Mali and conflict that's taken place over the past several years there.
After the neocons decided to destroy Libya and kick out Muammar Gaddafi, the Libyan state arsenals basically opened up, arming every ragtag jihadi group, largely across Africa, but especially in the Sahel. And you have the Tuareg, which have always wanted independence from any of the other governments there, and you have some actual Al-Qaeda affiliates. In this case, it raged on. Actually, back in 2014 already, we were in advanced discussions with the Minister of Defense of Mali, who wanted to build a rapid reaction police force, mining police force, to secure the whole northeast of the country. Mali is literally a massive land area, a lot of open sand. And if you think about remote, it's literally where the town Timbuktu comes from, which kind of describes the absolute end of civilization. And the U.S. and the French have had a major presence there for many years. We ended up not building the unit there in Mali because instead of paying for the capacity to be built, the president bought a new business jet, Boubacar Qaeda. And so this clown was ousted by a coup about 2 years ago, largely because the French, the Americans, nobody was able to actually put the fire out of these jihadis. Now the Russians are there and not great at building capacity, and they were going to actually seize some large artisanal gold mines, and they were ambushed repeatedly over a 40-kilometer track of desert, and the unit was completely annihilated. Reports of at least 50 dead Russians and another 30 Malian soldiers, all killed in action. It's a disaster for them there. And it speaks to just how dangerous and how unstable. And again, the very wealthy, expensive approach of the U.S. military and the French military didn't work. The very, I would say, thuggish, organized thievery of the Russian approach hasn't worked either. And sadly, all that area is going to continue to export terrorism and illegal migrants flowing to Europe and even flowing to the United States. So it is a mess, and it speaks to the need for competence and innovation in that space.
So the government and authority there, though, did turn to private military contractors, to support their security, correct? And that's what went wrong? Fill us in on that.
Yeah, sure. Again, the Russians, and there's a reasonable chance that the Ukrainians may have assisted the Tuareg in attacking this unit because normal jihadis are not able to take down helicopters and to have that organized and disciplined of an ambush. But it literally they wiped out the entire Russian unit. So it's. If it indeed is the case that the Russians or the Ukrainians affected that kind of damage, it speaks to the Ukraine conflict expanding to not just North Africa, but now even in the last few days, the Russians actually went cross-border into Russia, actually attacked near the city of Kursk, actually the scene of the largest tank battle in history of 1943. 6,000 tanks back then, and a very key point of geography. So the Ukraine war is still grinding on, and I really hope the next adult leadership, President Trump, can bring that thing to a close, because all it's doing right now is killing a lot of Ukrainian and Russian men very unnecessarily.
So look, Zelensky's got his hands full. He's always, crying poor mouth and needing, the American people to continue to funnel money his way. In a situation like this, if there really was Ukrainian involvement in this attack in Mali, was he supporting proxies? How can he justify reaching over into Africa when he's got so much conflict taking place right there in his own country?
I think they're looking for asymmetric ways to inflict pain on Russia and their other revenue generating activities because, look, with a few hundred people in Mali, the Russians can effectively loot the national wealth of Mali, which is what they're doing. I mean, that team that was annihilated was on its way to seize some very large artisanal gold mines, which were producing many hundreds of kilograms per month of gold. And just for audience sake, a kilogram of gold now sells for around $60,000 for, well, I'll call it $30,000 a pound.
So, after this attack, to your point, Mali cut diplomatic ties with Ukraine over the attack. And, this follows official comments that came out of Kiev on the attack. So it seems like there's little doubt that Ukraine had an involvement here.
Again, I haven't seen any proof, but the only indication I would witness is that it was a properly done attack and generally more effective than what jihadis can muster in the remote parts of Africa.
Yeah. How concerned should we be that Al Qaeda is operating at such a high profile level in a sort of a war torn area in Western Africa? Is it proof that they're on the rise or growing or strengthening?
It's proof that the last 24 years of GWAT were an abject failure, that the big government bloated approach does not work, and that whether it's being in Afghanistan for 20 years, replacing the Taliban with the Taliban, or all across the Sahel, from as far down as the Congo to even the middle of Mozambique, to all over the northern sandy parts of Africa, it's Al Qaeda and other fellow travelers of jihadis are running wild, and it's unacceptable. And again, no accountability, no adjustment for really failed policies that we've been doubling down on, tripling down for the last 20 years. So it's time for some change. It is time to deliver some measurable results and let people explain a different way of doing things.
Let's talk about Russia's interest here a little bit more, if we could, Erik. From this story, let me just take this excerpt. Russia has capitalized on the deteriorating relations between the West and coup-affected Sahel nations in West Africa to send fighters and assert its influence. Wagner has been active in the Sahel, the vast expanse south of the Sahara Desert, as the mercenaries profit from seized mineral riches in exchange for their security services. Exactly the point you were making, but talk to me a little bit more about Russia's interest. Again, I feel like Russia, too, has got way too much going on within their own borders to have to be, to the far reaches of Africa, but clearly those minerals are the incentive.
Yes, and the other big mineral that they're after, especially in Niger, in Burkina, is uranium. The Russians are smart enough to realize that nuclear fuel is exceedingly strategic and not in very many places around the planet. And that is a much better, longer-term, sustainable energy supply than the forced green revolution that the green left is imposing on Western societies. So they can, yes, they have a lot of things going on in Russia, but they can be very, very asymmetric with a few dozen people in each of these countries that are allowed to support those local governments. This was a major setback for them, losing 50 guys KIA, but they'll send 50 more and they will carry on because that's what the Russians do. But again, for all the hand-wringing in Washington, what do we do about the Russians? What do we do about the Chinese? Just outcompete them. Believe me, Mali, Niger, Burkina, Chad, Sudan, Somalia, all these countries want to put the fire out effectively. The sad thing is the U.S. State Department and the EU constantly block the actual private sector innovation. And now they wonder why the Russians are running circles around them and why the Chinese are running circles around them, because they're allowed to show up and they're allowed to innovate. And certainly they're not doing anything and everything perfectly, but imperfect in a vacuum is better than nothing. And that's sadly what the clowns in Washington have continued to impose on people that generally are suffering from having the jihadi sandal on their neck.
So, exit question on this segment, Erik. In a new Trump administration, what would you recommend? What are the top things you'd recommend for policy in Western Africa to sort of counter this dynamic?
I would. The U.S. needs to change its laws on how companies are allowed to go abroad and invest in mining and in minerals. Mining or energy projects, infrastructure projects. There's so many of our laws and regulations that have been drummed up around that space really inhibit American companies from going abroad. If the American companies are allowed to go abroad and they take security capacity with them, you're going to solve a lot of these things much more practically and cost effectively than having to send AFRICOM. Africa, what a joke. What a joke AFRICOM is. Their headquarters is still in Stuttgart, Germany. They can't do or deploy anything cost effectively. And it's, again, all of these spending programs need to be held to account. And the other thing that has to be done is a significant curtailment of a lot of this NGO money, which in many cases perpetuates misery and it doesn't actually solve much, which is, again, I feel terrible for the people in those countries that are suffering unnecessarily.
And you've informed us before here on Off Leash that these vast resources could be better leveraged to create a national security force in a country like Mali. Correct? Is that a potential solution there?
Look, there are millions of people fleeing those countries because of a complete failure of governance, and there's a lot of better governance models that can be employed and offered, and even if necessary, imposed on these continuously failing states. You owe it to those people to give them a decent shot at life. It doesn't require U.S. taxpayer subsidy.
Good. Well, look, we're going to talk about this again because hopefully we've got an incoming Trump administration that can change this dynamic all across West Africa. That's it for this segment of Off Leash with Erik Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. Don't forget to go to unplugged.com/offleash for your unplugged phone today. Until next time.